Hello, and thank you for your interest in various books that I've published over the years. I'm going to talk to you about three books basically, although two of them are textbooks have appeared in a number of different editions, and it's kind of interesting to track those editions. Yeah, but these books span more than 40 years. And so one of the things that's interesting about them is that you can kind of track the history of the study of conditioning and learning by looking through these books. Let me start with sharing this particular slide, which uh, was taken at the Baylor Symposium on learning mechanisms in food selection, which resulted in the first book that I had published. This is a picture taken in 1977, and as you can see, a lot of things have changed since that time. Here's the book that resulted from that. It was a pretty thick book edited by Lewis Barker, Michael Best, and myself. It was published in 1977 by Baylor University Press. Now, and it became a sort of a classic. Uh, uh, so that anyone who's doing research on food neophobia or taste aversion learning or related topics, social transmission of food and so on, had to refer to relevant chapters of this book. And what's of particular interest is that often these conference books that are inspired by a conference, they don't have much shelf life. People pay attention to them for a few years and then they're forgotten. This published in 1977 and it is still available on Amazon and it has been reissued by Baylor University Press, even though there have been other books on taste aversion learning and related topics. One is this one here, which came out in, let's see, 2009. Anyway, it all started with my involvement in that conference. And soon after that, in 1979, I signed a contract with Brooks Cole to write a comprehensive textbook on learning, which has come to be known as the Principles of Learning and Behavior. And here's the first edition of that book, which appeared in 1982. And as you can see, the cover involved a picture of a couple of kids playing the violin and a rat pressing a bar uh, uh, in a Skinner box, which illustrated the emphasis that we tried to maintain in the book during the ensuing 35, 40 years, namely that we didn't want this to be a rat book. We didn't want it to be a book about animal learning. We wanted it to be a book about uh, learning and behavior of all species, including humans, and that we tried to put it as many human examples as we could. Now, when I signed a contract for this in 1979, I had no idea what uh, what would come of the book. I had no idea if anybody was going to read it. I didn't read the part of the contract that had to do with translation rights and foreign sales and all that. I figured nobody's going to want to translate this thing. Well, in fact, the first edition was translated uh, by a publisher in Spain, Editorial Debate. And this started sort of the international impact that the book has had. The book is now in its seventh edition, and all of the various editions have been translated into Spanish. And in the first one was produced in Spain. Subsequent ones were produced in South America, and the book now has fairly wide distribution in South America. Uh, and because we're talking about a span of years from 1982 to 2022, if you will, uh, it's interesting to track, what did the book cover and what made the book special. So let's look at the uh, table of contents of the first edition. So there's the table of contents, and there were 12 chapters. Now, what's interesting about successive editions of the book that we had to stay with 12 chapters. The book had to fit into a, 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 a class, one semester class. Sometimes in some places they teach this that it's 2 semesters, but mostly it's a one semester class. And so 12 chapters is all we had room for. And the chapters start out with introduction, historical background, and so forth. And then we have organization of innate behavior. Mine was one of the first books that considered innate behavior, instinctive behavior to be so important as a foundation for modifications introduced by conditioning and learning that we actually devoted a chapter to that. And then we had a chapter on habituation and sensitization. That's also fairly unique and innovative for this book. One of the things we tried to do is we didn't want to do an operant, a Skinnerian type book. We didn't want a traditional book. We wanted a combination, eclectic, balanced approach, but an approach that's rooted in instinctive behavior and behavioral organization that the organisms bring to the learning situation. So we got 2 chapters on classical conditioning and instrumental behavior. Uh, um, Experimental analysis is, I presume, involved schedules of reinforcement, theories of reinforcement, experimental analysis. This is mostly instrumental behavior, signal value in instrumental conditioning, and secondary reinforcement. Then a chapter on aversive control. This is kind of interesting. And we had an entire chapter devoted to interactions between classical and instrumental conditioning. And what's interesting about that is that the content of the book changed as things went along. So here is the second edition, which appeared in 1986, still by Brooks Cole. And one of the things that you notice about the second edition is now we have 2 chapters on animal cognition. One focusing on memory mechanisms, and that's mostly working memory. And then a second one focusing on various phenomena that are now studied in the context of what we call animal cognition. The chapter on elicit behavior and is now combined with habituation and sensitization to make room for this additional chapter on comparative cognition. But we still have a chapter on interactions of classical and instrumental conditioning. And a third edition of the book came out was a bit delayed. Second one is 1986. This is 1993, and 1993 was the end of an editorial term. I served as the editor-in-chief of the Journal of Experimental Psychology, devoted to issues of conditioning and learning. And I was editor of that journal. It was published by the American Psychological Association. So I was the editor of that journal for 6 years, and so I saw a lot of cutting edge, the latest work that people were doing, even before anyone else saw it in print. And so my knowledge of conditioning and learning vastly increased, and I knew what everybody was working on. I knew most of the people working on these experiments personally, and I attended lots of conferences and got to know everybody. And so when it came time to do a new edition of the Principles of Learning and Behavior, and it's third edition. This is the most comprehensive and scholarly version of the textbook. And it now we've combined elicited behavior, habituation, and sensitization. We still have two chapters on comparative cognition, one focusing on memory mechanisms, and the other including what I referred to as complex animal cognition, which also covered studies on learning of language and components of language by non-human species. But we still have this chapter on instrumental, classical instrumental interactions and the associative structure of instrumental conditioning. And that became a new area of inquiry around this time. And one of the hallmarks of the books that the successive editions that I've produced is that we always wanted to be at the cutting edge. So I kept track of latest research, sorted it into, what parts of the book we could cover these things in. And in fact, on one occasion, I actually went and did a analysis of the year in which references that I cited were published and compared that to competing or other similar books that were available at the time. We were about 10 years, the distribution of references was much more current by about 5 or 10 years compared to what other textbooks were reporting at the time. So that was 1993, and one of the disadvantages of knowing a lot and feeling that it's all important and you have to write about it is that the book get the book gets longer, and so the third edition of this book is the most detailed and the longest version that we have, and students don't like that, instructors don't like that, and so subsequent the fourth edition and the fifth edition were a little more pared down, and one of the, when you get ready to write a new edition of a book, the book goes out for review. People who offer their comments, and they always suggest, hey, you should cover this, you should cover that, they always suggest things to add to the book. Nobody ever suggested things to leave out. But if you're a textbook writer and you're writing for a class that doesn't expand in a number of class days that are available, the book can't keep getting bigger and bigger. So anytime you add information, you have to make judicious decisions. You have to be careful about what you're going to leave out, how you're going to reorganize things. And so, as I mentioned, third edition was way too long. The fourth edition came out 5 years later, and it, uh, it was pared down. Now, the organization of chapters is not that different from the third edition, but you notice chapter on stimulus control no longer covers conditioned reinforcement. And chapter 6 became referred to as schedules of reinforcement and choice. And we still have this classical instrumental interactions chapter, but now it's uh, augmented by studies of the associative structure of instrumental behavior. And in showing you this slide, I thought I'd show you a picture. So things changed in the content of the book, and things changed in what I look like. Uh, The fifth edition came out a few years after that, and I just want to show you this because I love this book cover. This is my favorite book cover. A lion or a tiger, I guess, jumping through a flaming hoop, and one of the things I've enjoyed doing is to give students in a final exam an essay question, which asks them, what shaping procedures would you use to get a tiger to jump through a flaming hoop? It turns out, if you think carefully about the material that we covered in the book, you were able to answer that question. Okay, so that's that one. Fifth edition is kept some of the structure of the earlier ones, but you'll notice some changes. We still have these four chapters now are carried over from the fourth and third edition. We still got schedules of reinforcement, of course. And now we have a new chapter, the instrumental conditioning motivational mechanisms. Now, this is totally different, and it includes some of the new material on the associative structure of instrumental behavior. And stimulus control chapter omits a separate detailed section as conditioned reinforcement. And a big change in 2003. It's a new chapter on extinction of conditioned behavior, which was becoming a major topic, a major topic. And this was carried forward in the sixth edition, which had this really kind of cute cover on it. And let me just show you the Spanish version of the sixth edition. It's a pretty thick book, but one of the cute things about it, if you get a good picture of it, is you've got a human hand holding a big paw. I imagine it's a lion's paw. So it's kind of dramatic. I mean, it looks a little more dangerous than this situation where a baby elephant is playing with a human caretaker. So that's the sixth edition. Here is the table of contents for that, again with a chapter on extinction. And then finally we have the seventh edition, which came out in 2015, of course, was translated and is now available in Spanish. And the publisher, Cengage, has been quite satisfied with this version. The table of contents of the seventh edition I don't have here, but one of the major changes, that we always want the book to reflect changes in the field, and one of the major changes in the field of the study of learning and behavior, people have become tremendously interested in neural mechanisms, neural and molecular mechanisms that are responsible for learning effects. And we try to figure out some way to provide this information in the seventh edition. And these are pictures. The publisher agreed to provide some colored plates. Colored plates are very expensive, and they put the colored plates on the inside cover of the front, in the front and the back of the book, and then these color plates are referred to in other parts of the book. And as you can see, they include lots of typical diagrams that you might see in a neuroscience of learning type of book. But we discussed these neural mechanisms in what we call neuroboxes, which were written by Jim Grau. So now the book has a co-author, Jim Grau, to provide the neural mechanisms, and these are the topics that are covered in these neuro boxes. I personally, when I teach the class, I am too busy teaching the behavioral mechanisms, so I don't have time to talk about things like conditioning and the amygdala or search for the engram. I mean, I mentioned some of these things, genes and learning. I don't talk about neurobiology at time and so on, but I don't know how other individuals, other teachers use this material, but that remains one of the challenges in preparing new versions of this book. Okay, so that is the principles of learning and behavior with its various manifestations. And one of the things I haven't talked about, which is really a fun story, is that the publisher I started with was Brooks Cole. They were bought out by Wadsworth, which was bought out by Thomson Learning, which was bought out by Cengage. So each time there is one of these corporate transfers, the book contract gets bought out with with the company that is being purchased, and so the same contract that I signed in 1979 now is a contract with Cengage. All right, let me tell you about another book that I've had that I think has been a serious contribution to teaching of conditioning and learning. And this is the essentials of conditioning and learning. And why the essentials? Well, historically, there have been books that sort of summarize the field. One of the early ones is this one here. It's called Learning, a Survey of Psychological Interpretations by Winfred Hill. And this was published in 2002. And it's the seventh edition of this book. But Winfred Hill retired and passed away. And so there wasn't a comparable book available. And so at this time I was with Wadsworth, and I convinced them to publish a book called The Essentials of Conditioning and Learning. And this is the first edition of The Essentials, which came out in 1996. And it basically covers the same general topic as the principles of learning and behavior, but it only has the essentials. So if you don't want all the details, you read the essentials, and that gives you a shortcut introduction. And our first edition of the Essentials was picked up by a publisher in Spain, Del Lunar Colección Universitas, uh, and this appeared in 1996. And so my writing cycle was I would do a new version of the principles of learning and behavior. That kind of got me caught up and I've got sort of figured everything out. And then I would prepare the essentials version and a new essentials version. And that then went through a series of new editions. So this is the second edition. which was also translated into Spanish. And I wish I had the Spanish version because it had a kind of a blurred photograph, if you will, of a father and daughter washing a car. And it turns out that the daughter was the daughter of the translator of the book that permitted the uh, book to be available in Spanish. And so that was kind of. Then there's a third edition. Well, conditioning and learning, still with now it's Thompson Learning. This one came out in 2005. And then I was ready to do a fourth edition. And by then, Cengage had the contract, and they didn't want a fourth edition. But I was approached by the American Psychological Association, and they wanted to publish a book that I wrote. So I got the contract for the Essentials of Conditioning and Learning, who was released by uh, uh, at that time Thompson Learning, and was picked up by the American Psychological Association. So the fourth edition of the book appeared uh, in what year was 2018, and it's now published by the American Psychological Association. And now there is a fifth edition, which came out in 2023, about 40 years after the original Principles of Learning and Behavior. Is kind of fitting. I mean, there aren't many textbooks. I can assure you, there are not many textbooks that undergo successive revisions such that they remain useful and widely used in classes around the world for 40 years. I mean, think about that. Most of the students were not born when the first edition appeared. Most of their parents were not yet born when the first edition. So these books have outlasted not only the students but their parents, and so it's. I think it's quite a unusual contribution to the profession, and I've been privileged to be able to. Contribute to this or make it happen. I never thought when I began writing textbooks that I would be still writing textbooks 40 years later. But I can assure you I'm not going to be doing this 40 years from now. In fact, the fifth edition of the Essentials of Conditioning and Learning now has a co-author, Andrew Delamater, who incidentally just finished up a 6-year term as editor of the same Journal of Experimental Psychology devoted to studies of conditioning and learning that I edited for 6 years. The journal is still produced by the American Psychological Association. And now Andrew Delamater is a co-author on the essentials of conditioning and learning. So the next time a new edition is required of that, I suspect he will be preparing the new edition, and I will gradually fade away into the sunset. Well, it's been fun talking to you. I hope you learned something. I hope you found this account interesting. And uh, thanks very much for your attention. Thanks very much for your interest in these books. Bye bye now.